Meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf, 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 love our meatloaf. Ground meat, ground meat, ground meat, ground meat, meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Eggs, 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 meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf, 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 love our meatloaf. Breadcrumbs, 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 meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf, 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 love meatloaf. Spices, 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 in our meatloaf, in our meatloaf. Some people put other stuff, some people put other stuff. Eggs, 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 ground, 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 ground meat. Breadcrumbs, breadcrumbs, in our meatloaf. Spices, spices, add a touch of fun, fun, and excitement to our meatloaf. Meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Hot, warm, steamy from the oven. Hot, warm, steamy from the oven. Meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Ground meat, eggs, breadcrumb, spices, much, much more. Put anything in. Put anything in your meatloaf. Meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Some people put ketchup. Some people put ketchup. Onions, onions, and much, much more. Oatmeal, oatmeal. All kinds of stuff go in meatloaf. Meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Warm, hot, steamy from the oven. Meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Warm, steamy, hot from the oven. Meatloaf, 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 love our meatloaf. Ground meat, eggs, breadcrumbs, spices, much, much more. Ketchup, tomato, all kinds of things in meatloaf. Meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Warm, steamy, hot from the oven. Meatloaf, love it, love it, love our meatloaf. Meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf. Meatloaf, meatloaf, love our meatloaf.